Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go to market strategies for their business systems. Welcome, everyone, to our podcast. I have the pleasure of having Aaron Katske join me today. He's a Senior Director of IT and Business Systems at Globality, and we're looking forward in hearing from you, Aaron. Welcome.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron, love to hear a little bit about your journey to the enterprise world and how did you become a senior director? Like, what has been some of your interesting moments? Love to hear your journey.
Yeah, so I have a pretty atypical journey into the IT enterprise. I actually started my career as a cook in San Francisco and enjoying the virtues of the kitchen. And after several years of enjoying that lifestyle, I actually went back to IT that I spent a lot of time in, and went back to IT as an infrastructure person working consulting for multiple companies and doing smaller end companies in their IT when they don't have the money or the resources to have IT people on staff. And we also did ISP, learning the tricks of the trade before the big huge ISPs had taken over when the Valley was young. And from there, I basically got into IT management, running an IT department for a trucking company. And after that, I moved up to a supply chain company named Elam Technologies that does some really great 3PL work for some of the biggest companies in the Bay Area, and including Apple. And after that, I joined a company that was disrupting the electric bus market, kind of like the Tesla of buses, named Proterra. And I served as the director of IT there, as we took on what is a very hard to change market and basically has very little technology in their product stacks. And we kind of applied modern day IoT and some of best practices across the technology stack to really help them be successful in a market that was really hard to change. And after spending a few years there, I left and have joined Globality. And Globality is a SaaS application that that we target for Fortune 500, Fortune 100s really, that are interested in revolutionizing how they do procurement. And so we take on one of the biggest challenges in business, which is that big companies they struggle with getting suppliers in order to do services, and it's everybody has their different process. There's lots of red tape, and our goal is to use the power of the cloud and artificial intelligence, natural language processing, to make that process not only easy but translate months and months and months of work into days, and get the best services at the best price for these customers, and get them the right vendors that they would never normally be exposed to.
That's a really interesting journey, Aaron, and love to learn a little bit more. But I also want to kind of understand you said about selling to Fortune 100 companies and helping procurements. So overall, what's your company's go-to-market strategy? Like, is it mostly direct? Do you also do partnership? And then obviously, how does IT enable that whole sales motion?
Right. So I would say that in general, our model is direct. We like to work with these big, huge companies to really understand their challenges. I think, part of the value that the company brings is not only, solving this problem that's kind of generic, but really inserting ourselves in how they do business in order to optimize their processes, right? And so that goes from, understanding exactly how companies really struggles with the procurement process and how our product can kind of integrate into how they do business. So instead of being, kind of that new product they have to use, we're just the process they use, and it's easier because we know exactly the challenges they're facing.
Yeah. I think go to market with system integrators is always key. I mean, we go to market with Salesforce internally, so I completely relate to that. In terms of systems, right? You mentioned about obviously your knowledge infrastructure, and now with business applications, like what are the systems that you have deployed internally to sort of enable these processes? I'm talking about CRM, monetization platforms like CPQ, billing. Uh, Good to get some understanding of the stack you have, and is it homegrown? Is it out of the box? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so being in a software engineering company, there's always the challenge of, we can build it, right? And we have all these
Yeah,
really
yeah,
talented software engineers that can build everything.
right.
And so, IT is one of these folks that kind of are on the outside of that, right? IT's job isn't to engineer the product. Our job is to really kind of run the business and help the business be efficient. And so we use a lot of third-party products that integrate tightly, and that's kind of one of the unique challenges that we face at Globality is using this kind of best of breed software and integrating it with these third-party applications, CRM tools. You mentioned Salesforce. We're a big Salesforce user. We use it not only in the typical CRM, but we use it as to help our product along and really understand a lot of the pieces that are going on as people utilize our product. Obviously, there's a big piece of understanding, each client individually, especially when they're so big. They have different needs, and so that CPQ process is different for every customer. They're very snowflake-like. They have very unique processes that they have to follow, and therefore, the way that we work with them is very different.
Right.
And that's really an interesting part about the IT stack is that we kind of take on these best of breed tools, and because we're working with big, huge companies, that have these huge compliance requirements, we have to act and we have to be certified at those same levels. So you have to be, a startup and agile and be able to, be mindful and able to service these companies, but you also have to be at that very high compliance bar.
Exactly. I think that's always a challenge, right? Startups selling to Fortune 100 companies, whether it's security compliance or so many other details that they would need, and they would expect same governance within your organization. So you can relate to that. What about projects, right? So obviously last year was a very interesting year, but like, did you undertake any interesting projects in enabling go-to-market, pricing, or billing? Uh, and do you have anything lined up in those lines?
Yeah, like I said, one of the real challenges we face is that every customer, because they're so big, has different contract requirements, right? So
Right.
they have different engines driving why they've come to Globality, right? And that is a big part of our value add, right? Because we have this giant we have this giant repository of different needs that people have, right? Depending on what service they're using, depending on what industry it's in. And so I think one of our biggest challenges upcoming is really figuring out how to do what we're doing successfully for our customers at scale. And so I think a big part of that piece is, trying to interact with not only the customer and figuring out how their contract works, but also our internal finance teams and figuring out how can they make sense of all the data that's coming in that this custom made platform is producing. And so I think one of our goals for this year is to really understand that data better and really drive some automation around how we generate billing and how we basically be a better a vendor to these big huge clients.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in terms of any best practices or lessons learned, and it doesn't have to be just a Globality, but in your IT other engagements, like anything you wanted to share, like when you take up a transformation, like what do you typically look for? What are some of the signals that you try to catch, and how do you ensure that any transformation, right, whether it is on the infrastructure side or on the business application side, is successful?
Yeah, I mean, transformation is always hard. It is one of those things, especially in IT. In general, when I have been brought into companies, they're at a kind of inflection point where they realize that, that startup IT mentality of everybody kind of just grab a laptop and go, that every kind of system, grab your credit card and buy. Those days are over, and we need to start preparing for us to actually be a product that's and a business that that has equitable and auditable, and that we can work with these big huge customers. I think if I had to distill all that down into a few best practices and lessons learned, I would probably start out and say number one is that I think being agile as a company and being able to meet your customers' needs also has to be followed in IT, right? So you need to be agile. You need to adjust to new practices. I think a lot of time small IT departments, as they grow, really miss out on the value of some of that structure. They miss out on the value of a process, and I think bringing those processes sometimes can be feared as slowing a company down and making them not as agile, but in a lot of ways it supports them and helps them build for growth. And a lot of my priority when I get into a new company is to really kind of step back, analyze how the business is being done, and then ask the question, is that the right way to do it? And typically run away when you hear people say things like, this is always the way we've done it. We've always done it this way. Those are kind of the magic words that light up sirens, and for me, gives me the opportunity to really say, okay, well, maybe we should take that back to the drawing board and figure out if that's the right way. And I think that's not localized to IT. I mean, I think it's good for IT to do that as well, but I think that works well cross-functionally, right? And as IT is more integrated to business needs and helping different domains of the business be successful, we have to start asking that question to a lot of our business partners and the software they're using and the processes they're doing and interacting, so that we can get to the heart of what the best way for the company to work is, and not just the best way to continue doing the things we've been doing. And that's a real challenge for a lot of people.
Right.
It's too hard to overcome.
Exactly. No, I totally hear you and relate to that. I think doing the same thing again and again is not smart. What are your priorities, Aaron, for 2021? Like, as you look at your roadmap and your initiatives, how are you planning to sort of align yourself with business initiatives? What are some of the priorities that you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think if I had to pick one priority for 2021, it's got to really be about the data. I mean, I think as companies really grow out of that immature status and they start to become more mature, data becomes more and more important, and building information off of that data becomes not only an optional or a nice to have, it becomes an essential, and being able to use that data to produce metrics that are really valuable and judging the company's progress, they become the quintessential part of what IT's value proposition is. And if you can use that data to really bring sense to what's going on in the company and what levers have what effect, it's a big part of a successful company's transition to scale and to taking on more customers and to growing in general. So I think my big priority for 2021 is really going to be about using our data to effectively deliver quality information across our business partnerships, and make sure that we help them be successful and help them measure the things that they need to measure to be successful.
That's great, Aaron. We're almost at the end of our podcast. I have one final question for you, Aaron. This is for a lot of our listeners who are early in their career. So what would you advise somebody who is, let's say, a business analyst or a IT developer, like what should they be doing to become a senior director and be in a position like you? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I would have to say, I think my recommendation to anyone starting out in the industry or young in the industry or wanting to grow into the management track is to really understand the business more than the technology. Because I think a lot of people, especially when they're young in their career, they get stuck in the technology that they're working on, and it's like, oh man, I'm going to be this Sage CRM, or I'm going to be the Salesforce expert, and that's really good at being a Salesforce person. But if you want to be in management and you want to be able to work in any company, you have to understand how business is done. And I think a lot of people underestimate that value proposition. You have to know the technology. I'm not saying you don't, but really the people that stand out in my mind when I do interviews and when I'm looking for managers are really people that take the business side of it and understand how the technology can propel propel those business challenges forward. And then of course you have to be able to do the technology, and you also have to have experience, right? You can't take that away. But in general, the technology changes company to company, right? So you can't be a specialist in every piece of software. You can't be a specialist in every domain. So understanding, how people face these problems, and as you kind of grow into this position and you get higher in an organization, you see the problems kind of repeat themselves company to company, business unit to business, right? So if you understand that, you can really do whatever you need to do.
Right. Exactly. So, Aaron, it's been a pleasure listening to you, getting to know about your journey, and thanks for being so candid and open and sharing some of the insights. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website, protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss your show.